My first YouTube video was a video about my concept for a new Mario Kart game. It was the first in a series of 7 videos, and it was something I had always had on my mind but never had an effective way to talk about. YouTube gave me that platform and that voice to be able to express something I had a deep love for. Not necessarily to a massive audience, but at least in a way that made me feel like I could be heard. I'm glad that could be my first video, but it wasn't supposed to be. When I first got my current laptop and capture card, I wasn't sure what exactly to make a video on, but eventually I hit upon something that I knew I would enjoy. Dogs. Not like Dogz the animal. I mean, yes, Dogz the animal, but I'm talking about Dogz the game. You may have heard it by another name, Petz Dogz 2, or its cat's version. Or you might have never heard of it because it's an obscure piece of what seems to be shovelware. But to me, Petz Dogz 2 is more than that. It's a massive part of my childhood, one of my first Wii games, and one I had always looked back at fondly. And there are many games like that which don't stand the test of time when I revisit them. Sonic Heroes is a good example, a game I loved as a kid but which became permanently tainted when I played it as an adult. Same goes for older Pokemon games, especially Sapphire. For some games I can overlook this and enjoy it for what it is, such as Robot Wars Arenas of Destruction or Digimon Rumble Arena. However, with Petz Dogz 2, I knew that when I returned to it I would be met with an experience that hit my nostalgia nerve nicely, but ultimately would end up being permanently tainted to my adult self. When I actually sat down to play it for the first time in over a decade, it was really good. Sort of. Playing Petz Dogz 2 and reviewing it on YouTube was just meant to be a fun way for me to ease myself into YouTube with a game that is obscure enough that few people would have talked about it, but notable enough that some people might try to find a video about it. Instead, I found a game like nothing else I've played before, and so now, 2.5 years since I tried to first make that video, I finally wanted to return to it and explore what it is that makes Petz Dogz 2 a masterpiece. Kinda. Also, by the way, I'm going to be referring to the game as Dogs for the rest of this video, mainly because that's what the name is in PAL regions, and also I'm lazy. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the multiplayer mode today, and that's for 2 reasons. The first is that there's not really that much interesting to talk about there. The second is that I once played it with my family, and they were so put off that they'll never play it with me again, meaning it would be very hard for me to get the actual gameplay footage. What I'll be focusing on today is the adventure mode, and when you go into this, your first task is to choose your dog's breed and name. In my case, I chose... I see. I decided to choose a Schnauzer called Ziggy. The reason I did this is because it's the same name as one of my dogs, Ziggy, who was also a miniature Schnauzer. Yes, he is unfortunately no longer with us. Alright, now that I have clinical depression, let's jump into the game. The first thing that we do is listen to our doggy daddy, note change that in the final script, talk about his magical hat. He tells us that it has incredibly powerful magic and that it could be disastrous if it fell into the wrong paws. I wonder if that will happen. We then meet up with our corgi friend, Victor, and go to the jail to taunt our local criminal, Ivlet, who is a wolf. Fortunately, Sheriff Ada tells us to stay away from the evil wolf, advice we will absolutely listen to. After this, we go to the beach and play some games together in what is an overly long tutorial section, taking me over 20 minutes to complete. I guess it's good to get used to the controls, and there's a fair bit to get used to. This game is played using a single Wii remote, which is honestly probably the greatest issue it has. As with many Wii games, pointer controls are necessary here, but in this case it's responsible for movement. In order to move, you have to point your cursor at the screen and hold B. It's unconventional and it comes with issues. Firstly, Wii pointer controls can be very dodgy, and in my first play session I had some issues with the control setup, although this was admittedly because my sensor bar wasn't in an optimal position and it was better when I adjusted it. Another issue is that in order to sprint you have to point the controller higher up on the screen, which ends up requiring the pointer to be off screen, which is all fine and dandy, but at that point the Wii pointer struggles to pick up the signal and it can make turning really difficult. There are some other actions you can perform, such as sniffing. This is done using the A button, and this lets you find items that might be hidden close by. Most of the items you find are fruit, vegetables and flowers, but there are sometimes also key items you'll pick up this way. To actually get these, you'll need to dig them up, which is done by shaking the Wii remote. Again, the Wii motion controls leave a lot to be desired, and sometimes the game doesn't register your shakes, especially when coming out of a sniff, but it works well enough. Honestly, that's how I describe the game's controls in general. It works well enough. It has some awkward implementation, and it doesn't always work perfectly, but it's serviceable enough once you're used to it. There's also mini games you can perform to catch insects or fish, and these are fine too. I kinda skipped most of the fishing and bug catching, but I can see it having a similar appeal to something like Animal Crossing in that regard. But anyway, let's get back to the plot. We're told off by Augusta for daring to mention Ivlet's name, and then we get home and give out cookies to the townsfolk for our mum. This section is mainly used as a way to introduce us to the characters who will man the facilities in the town, which will come in handy later in this game, but it also introduces us to the currency of the game, as the characters give us money as thanks for the cookies. We don't get a lot of money, but we get at least 3G from every character, other than Tom, who insists that he's absolutely not a cheapskate. Sure Tom, we believe you. So this is a cute little game. You go around catching bugs and fish, collecting vegetables, and running errands for people. It's small, it's cute, it's sweet, and it's quite simple. After Nintendo Dogz, there was a lot of desire for these kinds of games, chill games where you can just play with dogs, and that's not a bad thing. Sure, there's no conflict, but that doesn't. Oh my god, what's happening? Oh, what, no, what, how, why, what, no, I don't, what, no, how is this, what is happening, how did this, what the heck happened? Okay, let's back up a bit. After we've done a cookie delivery, we decide to go and see Ivlet again, but at night this time. What happens next is both entirely predictable and incredibly stupid at the same time. Ivlet manipulates us into telling him where the magic hat is, and then gets us to prove that it's really a magic hat. So, we get the magic hat, and he tells us it's torn and he can show us where the tear is. At which point he steals the hat. Well, that sucks. And after that he lays waste to the island. Even as a kid, this took me completely off guard. I was expecting a cute game about playing with dogs. Honestly, I was actually expecting a complete Nintendo Dogz clone, but this... Ivlet just straight up destroys people's homes, then possesses the animals in the zoo to make them all angry and escape, and he does the same to all of the wild animals. This game got surprisingly dark. For a piece of shovelware for kids, of course, but I still love the turn this game suddenly takes. Also, I'm not ignoring the fact that our intimidating villain ends up wearing a goofy top hat, I'm merely leaving it there for now. And if it couldn't get darker, child imprisonment is apparently a thing on this island. We're locked up for the small crime of letting an evil wolf get a hold of the most powerful magical artifact on this island, but Augusta comes along and convinces Ada to let us go, because, hey, all kids make mistakes, right? The condition is that we have to help everyone on the island who has been hurt or inconvenienced by Ivlet's actions. All the adults tell us not to go after Ivlet, which obviously means we'll be going after Ivlet. Victor, however, is so racked with guilt he locks himself inside the jail. I guess we'll have to come and get him once Ivlet has been defeated. When we leave the jail, we encounter Beat. He tells us that he is the good part of the hat, and that Ivlet's evil heart was so great that that part of the hat was forced out and manifested as, apparently, a sentient stick of gum. He tells us that Ivlet got captured on purpose because evil people can't normally get onto the island due to the hat's protection, but apparently the hat makes exceptions for the sake of law enforcement. Beat becomes our guide throughout the game, kinda like Navi, Cappy, Rotom Dex, you know the type. From this point, the game gets you to help everyone on the island, and frankly, it feels like they extended the tutorial section to be hours longer than it needed to be. It acts as a way for you to learn some of the additional mechanics, including combat, sort of. Animals in the game act as your main enemies, and there are 5 different statuses that they can take. Safe means that they're not a threat and they have not noticed you. Dangerous means they have noticed you but are not yet attacking you. Angry means they are actively trying to attack you, so you need to get out of there quick. Sleep is when the animal is sleeping and so isn't going to come for you unless you disturb it. Stunned is when you've managed to incapacitate it yourself. You can't fight the enemies at first, but if you get close enough to them you can bark and this stuns them. It isn't exactly combat, and enemies can mostly be completely avoided by just walking around them, but the effort is noted. Later on you're able to throw stones at enemies, which is especially good for your flying enemies. There are more mechanics that you can learn as the game goes on, such as crouching in grass and pushing boulders, as well as being able to call friendly animals to help you dig through a tunnel or cross a body of water. You're also able to play minigames against the escaped zoo animals to convince them to go back to the zoo. I wouldn't say this game has depth, but they do provide plenty of gameplay variety, so that's nice. Also, can we talk about the fact that the zoo animals talk? They seem to be as sentient as the dogs in this universe, which makes me wonder, why are they zoo animals? Why are they locked up where the dogs get to roam free? What is this sick, twisted dystopia that has been crafted? Is this the oppression that Ivlet has been fighting against? Is his aim simply to tear down the current flawed system that lets animals be treated as if they are lesser than the dogs? Is he just a freedom fighter? Are we the oppressive regime trying to... The game from this point comprises mostly of fetch quests and the like. It isn't terrible, but after having just witnessed Ivlet causing a biblical apocalypse, it feels a little underwhelming to be helping Augusta get rid of the prairie dogs in her field. And it is a very long section. It takes about half of the game all told, but it isn't too bad. Also, shout out to Sai for being the absolute worst. I get it, your dad died and you miss him, but can you not guilt trip me into getting you food when I'm trying to help people rebuild their homes? Eventually, we're tasked with going to Sky Heights to find the wizard Theophilus. He was the original creator of the hat, which I guess makes him really old, seeing as our dad claimed that the hat had been passed down through generations of his family. And I guess that means he's even older in dog years. That's like 7 carried the... It's old. He tells us that we can stop Ivlet, but it requires us to find 3 crystals: the water, earth, and ice crystals. This is where the adventure game finally starts to give us some adventure, but it can't help giving us some more fetch quests before that, including one where Sai asks us to fish up some swordfish so he can taste it in memory of his father. I'm starting to think this guy's lying about his dead dad and is just really hungry all the time. In order to find the crystals, we need to go through 3 dungeons, each one leading to one of the crystals. Now, in a game like Zelda, you might expect to be solving puzzles throughout the dungeon, but this game is a lot simpler, so instead, we have to use our sniffing ability to find the crystals at the end of the dungeon. At least, that's the intended method. I figured out after the first dungeon that they're pretty much linear, so you don't really need to bother with all the sniffing stuff and you can just dash straight to the end. To be fair, they do introduce some more difficulty elements in the next dungeons with temperature management. Before going into these dungeons, you need to get clothing to protect against extreme heat or extreme cold, although what this is meant to do for the cold, I do not know. In the second dungeon, you need to watch your temperature doesn't get too high and take a drink at periodic oases to bring it back down to neutral. This would be pretty tricky if I was trying to sniff my way through, but as I'd worked out that I didn't have to, I just dashed between the oases, replenished my thirst, and got the second crystal in about 2 minutes. The third dungeon was even easier. This one is extremely cold, but you can bring your temperature up by warming up in hot springs. Thing is, you can actually bring it above neutral, which I exploited to let me skip over a bunch of the hot springs and get to the crystal really quickly too. Honestly, it's kinda laughably underwhelming. We spent all that time doing fetch quests to get to the adventure stuff, and now that it's here, it's so easy we can get it done in no time at all. Fortunately, we aren't done yet. We have the crystals, but we can't make the shield without Theophilus's brother Bartholomew, who went missing years ago. This takes us to a desert area, where Beat tells us there are dangerous buffalo, and we might have to crouch in grass to avoid them. Naturally, I just ran past them. Ivlet also summoned a bunch of tornadoes, but we can run past those as well. Finally, we find Bartholomew and discover he has spent all this time getting stoned. I have waited 2.5 years to make that joke, and it still isn't as funny as the fact that Bartholomew canonically turned himself into a rock for decades so he could study rocks. But he helps us to get rid of the tornadoes by giving us rocks to throw at them. Magical rocks. It makes complete sense. Finally, it's time to take on Ivlet. I decided to get dressed up for the occasion. Nothing like a top hat and tux when you're trying to take out a demonic wolf. Speaking of the dastardly lupine, shall we check up on him? Oh, Ivlet, are you okay? You don't look so hot. Wait, oh. Okay. So it seems that Ivlet has digivolved into Garuramon. And then out of nowhere, he just decides to make a dragon. Alright, what is with this game? It's called Dogs, why has it suddenly crossed over with Monster Hunter? This is why this game fascinates me. One minute you'll be finding an insect for Stanley so we can work faster, the next minute you're dealing with the end of the world and going toe to toe with godlike entities. Sorry Gertrude, that chamomile you wanted will have to wait, I have to go and slay Smaug. So before we can take on Ivlet, we have to fight the dragon, known as the Chaos Dragon. There have been enemies in the rest of the game, but this is the first proper fight we've had, and it's a nice change of pace. It's not exactly difficult. The Chaos Dragon only has 3 hearts of health, upside down for some reason, and you harm him by throwing stones at him. He also gets stunned when you hit him, but you can't do anything to him when he's stunned, so you might as well grab another stone. He never actually attacked me, he just roared a lot. Then comes Ivlet. He has 5 hearts, and for him, throwing stones at him only stuns him. Once he's down, you need to damage him by barking at him. Again, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but he did at one point manage to land a hit on me by teleporting just as I threw a stone at him and then pouncing on me. But I was able to build up hearts over the game, and you get way too much money, so I also stocked up on healing items, so I really wasn't worried. Soon enough, Ivlet is defeated. He turns back into his regular form, which is honestly a bit scarier than his monster form now that I look at it, and he gets sucked into a black hole, presumably dying. This game somehow has a body count. Ivlet, the Chaos Dragon, Sai's dad, Sai if he ever asks me for food again. Bartholomew and Theophilus congratulate me on becoming a murderer, and Beak tells me he has to leave to become one with Nahat again. I think I'm supposed to care about that. Finally, we have a touching reunion with our mother and father, and our father gives us the magic hat to keep, because clearly we can be trusted after what happened last time. So, what exactly is it that I just played? Dogs is difficult at first to put in any category. It has things that are easy to get invested in, especially the bizarreness of a lot of what happens, and the surprisingly dark turn it takes when Ivlet is set free, but the controls are a bit wonky at times, and the gameplay is super basic. This seems like it should be a bad game, but it doesn't feel like a bad game. I do, however, think I've figured out exactly why that is. The game is an adventure game for kids. Yes, stating the obvious, I know, but I think people have a very skewed perception of what that means. On the one hand, it may be something like Mario or Pokemon, where it's designed to be suitable for kids, but it still holds plenty of depth that makes it just as enjoyable, if not more, to adults. On the other hand, it may be a game that's very basic and isn't very good, but at the very least has bright flashing colours that will distract kids. There is no in between. If a game is for kids, it's either bad or good for adults as well. You can't have a game that is good for only kids, there is not that in between. Except Dogs is the in between. This is a very basic game. Most of its gameplay is simple enough that as adults, we can just skip past them or find a way to exploit them. But for kids, they haven't developed the skills to be able to do that, so it does present a challenge to them. For example, the enemies that I spent most of the game just running past, a kid won't be able to do that. They have to actually engage with the light combat system. I found ways to complete the dungeons in minutes, but most kids aren't going to work that out, so they'll have to sniff their way through them and try to manage their temperature. The final battle was easy to me, but for a kid that will be their ultimate test. This game understands how really young kids work, and it crafts a game suitable for that. The conclusion I've come to is that this game is an extremely well-made game exclusively for kids. Adults cannot appreciate this game. It holds nothing that an adult can enjoy, unless you played it as a kid. Being older, I can see the things that hold this back from being something people can enjoy, but I can still enjoy it for my own nostalgia. However, I only have that nostalgia for it because as a kid it was a genuinely excellent game. It has its issues, but overall, this game has had genuine effort and talent put behind it. Whoever is watching this video might not understand, but this game is a masterpiece in its own right. Not perfect, not the greatest game of all time, but I would say that if ever you want to start little Timmy on his first ever adventure game, this would be better for the job than pretty much anything else. It has plenty of gameplay variety, a difficulty that a kid will actually find perfectly balanced for them, and on top of all of this, it has some really bizarre elements that are worth checking out in their own right, and Ivlet is a genuinely intimidating antagonist given the context. Well, that's it I guess. I would recommend you go play this game. It's at least something that would be interesting to check out. And other than that, unless I'm forgetting anything, that's all I had for you, and I'll see you in the next one. Wait, what happened to Victor? Did he ever... No, he just stays in jail. Jesus, they're keeping a child in jail indefinitely. You know what, screw this. Ivlet was right. The Dog Society must be brought to rubble and ruin. They took our lord away from us too soon.